Zola, an 80-year-old woman, lives in a small Nigerian village, surrounded by the care of her grown children, Abeo and Tandi. For many, Zola was a symbol of wisdom and resilience, a matriarch who had held her family together for decades. Her life seemed peaceful and steady: daily walks through the village streets, warm evenings spent talking with her children, and memories of the past. But hidden beneath this calm life were secrets no one suspected. One hot morning, Zola decided to undergo a routine medical checkup, more at the insistence of her children than from any real need. She felt fine, aside from occasional tiredness that came with age. But when the doctors made their announcement, it felt as if the world crumbled for everyone. Zola was pregnant. This news spread through the village like wildfire. People gathered outside Zola's house, whispering about a miracle or a divine sign. Some saw it as a heavenly intervention, while others shook their heads in disbelief. For Zola and her family, however, it was more than just a surprise. It was the beginning of a crisis that would uncover old wounds and hidden truths. Abeo, the eldest son, reacted with shock and disbelief. How was this possible? He demanded explanations from the doctors, from his mother, from anyone who could give a logical answer to this unexplainable situation. Tandi, on the other hand, believed that something greater was at play, something they simply could not understand. Yet amidst all this chaos, Zola remained outwardly calm, as if she had known this day would come. Deep in her eyes lay a hidden anxiety, and in her heart secrets she had carried for many years. Chapter 1: Ordinary Life. For the people in the village, Zola was known for her resilience and wisdom, earning their respect for her years of devotion to her family. Her children, Abeo and Tandi, always saw their mother as a source of strength and support. Even at her advanced age, Zola remained an energetic woman who loved tending to the household, caring for the garden, and chatting with neighbors. Abeo and Tandi, now adults, lived nearby and often visited their mother to help her with daily chores. Their home was full of memories from childhood, warmth from family traditions, and long conversations under the trees. Abeo, the eldest son, was a man of strict discipline and rationality. He respected his mother deeply but tended to think logically and always aimed to stay in control. He was the one who insisted that Zola undergo regular medical checkups, despite her assurances that she felt fine. It was important to him to make sure their mother's health was in order, as her age constantly worried him. Tandi, on the other hand, was more spiritual and faithful. She saw her mother not only as a woman but also as a symbol of their deep connection to ancestors and traditions. Unlike her brother, she believed in mystical signs and miracles. To her, everything in life had a higher meaning, and thus she treated Zola with almost reverential respect, seeing her as a bearer of ancient wisdom. On the day when Zola returned from the clinic with incredible news, her children were stunned. They gathered in the home where they had always found comfort, now sitting in complete confusion, not knowing how to react. "How is this possible?" Abeo exclaimed, wringing his hands in frustration. "Mom, you're 80 years old. This must be a mistake. We have to double-check the test." Tandi remained silent, but a deep thoughtfulness was evident in her eyes. She quietly turned to her mother and said, "Maybe it's not a mistake, Abeo. There are things we can't understand. Maybe this is a sign, something important." Zola sat in her favorite chair, looking out the window at the sunset. Her face remained calm, but inside, her emotions were boiling. This was the moment she had feared and expected for many years. She knew this day would come, but she never thought it would arrive like this. "You both must know that there are things that are hard to explain," she finally said, addressing her children. "But I need time to tell you everything. Things aren't as simple as they seem." Abeo couldn't believe his ears. He was used to controlling his life with logic and facts, but now, everything he believed in was crumbling before him. He didn't know what to do next, and this feeling of helplessness scared him. "Mom, what do you mean by that?" His voice trembled with both anger and fear. "What aren't you telling us?" Zola shifted her gaze from one child to the other. The weight of the truth was heavy on her shoulders, but she knew it was impossible to continue hiding what had been hidden for decades. "Time will reveal everything," she replied quietly, then stood up, leaving her children in complete bewilderment. Abeo and Tandi exchanged glances. Tandi sensed that there was more behind their mother's words, but she had no idea how close they were to uncovering a mystery that would soon change their lives forever. Chapter 2: Shock and Disbelief. The next morning, Abeo couldn't calm down. His thoughts kept returning to the strange news. He had spent the night in distress, going over all the possible explanations that could make sense of the situation. A medical error? Some kind of medical phenomenon? Or was it something more? He couldn't remain in uncertainty and decided to contact the doctors immediately. This is absurd, he thought, packing his things for the trip to the clinic. At 80 years old, this is impossible. Meanwhile, Tandi, on the other hand, was deep in thought. Though she, too, was shocked, her mind began to see the unusual event as a sign from above. To her, this pregnancy could be part of a mystical plan, a message they needed to decipher. Mother was always connected to something greater than just our reality, she whispered to herself, remembering her mother's stories of old customs and ancient rituals practiced in their family. Perhaps this is a sign from our ancestors. When Abeo arrived at the clinic, he was determined. He insisted on additional tests and consultations with the doctors. The specialist who had examined Zola tried to explain that they had no reason to doubt the results. "We've conducted all the necessary tests," the doctor said calmly, reviewing the papers. "Although the case is indeed unusual, at this point we have no reason to believe it's a mistake." "Unusual? That's an understatement," Abeo replied irritably. "My mother can't be pregnant at her age. I demand more tests and consultations with other specialists." The doctor simply nodded, understanding that the family was in shock. He offered to bring in another doctor for a second opinion to clear up any doubts. But even when the new tests confirmed the same results, Abeo couldn't accept it. When he returned home, he found Tandi sitting on the veranda, lost in thought. Abeo stopped abruptly in front of her, not knowing how to start the conversation. "I was at the doctor's," he began, trying to suppress his anger. "They confirmed the pregnancy again. This is real, Tandi. But I don't believe it's anything supernatural, as you might think. This is impossible from a medical perspective." Tandi took a deep breath and looked up at her brother. Her eyes were calm and serene, which irritated Abeo even more. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "But, Abeo, not everything can be explained by science. Mother was always special, her life was always full of mystery. I don't think we can dismiss the possibility that deeper forces are at play here." "Deeper forces?" Abeo exclaimed, starting to lose his temper. "That's madness. We need to treat this as a medical problem, not try to find some mystical meaning in it." At that moment, Zola came out onto the veranda, having overheard her children's argument. Her face remained calm, but inside, her emotions were boiling. She knew this moment was approaching, and soon she would have to reveal the truth she had kept hidden for so long. "Children," she interrupted their argument in a soft yet firm voice. "I understand you're confused. But there are things you don't know. It's time for you to learn the truth about what happened many years ago. You must be ready, as it will change everything." Abeo and Tandi froze. What could their mother be hiding that had made her keep such an important secret for so long? Both of them knew that their lives would never be the same once the truth came out. "What do you mean, Mother?" Tandi asked quietly, sensing that the moment she had feared had finally arrived. Zola looked at her children, took a deep breath, and finally began to tell the story of her past, knowing it would mark the beginning of the end of their peaceful lives. Chapter 3: Shadows of the Past. Zola slowly sat down on the veranda beside her children, her gaze fixed in the distance, as if she were reliving memories she had tried to forget for decades. Silence hung in the air before she began to speak. "Many years ago, when I was still young, your Aunt Camille and I had a desire we dared not speak of to anyone," Zola began, slowly choosing her words. "We both dreamed of preserving our youth and being able to have children even in old age. We were so naive." Abeo and Tandi listened intently. What had once seemed like the peaceful flow of their lives suddenly became something darker, hidden under layers of time and silence. Zola continued, her voice growing quieter. "In our village, there was an old healer. Rumors surrounded him, many feared his powers. Camille and I, we secretly sought him out. We asked him for the power to preserve our youth, a power that would allow us to become mothers at any time, even years later. It was foolish, I know, she sighed, shaking her head. But back then, we didn't understand that such desires come with a price. Tandi sighed, feeling that the hidden magic she had suspected was indeed real. But her brother Abeo couldn't contain his frustration. "Mother, you can't be serious," he said, shaking his head. "Are you saying this was some sort of ritual? Superstitions?" Zola looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness and regret. "It wasn't just a ritual. It was magic, and I was foolish enough to believe it would not bring harm." We both began the ceremony. Camille, however, stopped halfway, frightened by the consequences. But I continued. The healer warned that one day the consequences of this decision would catch up with me, but I didn't listen. I thought I could outsmart fate. "And what are these consequences?" Abeo interrupted impatiently, burning with curiosity. "Are you saying that after all these years, it's affecting your life now? Your body?" Zola nodded and continued her story. "This ritual gave me the ability to remain fertile, but over the years, I began to feel its shadow growing stronger. This wasn't normal fertility. It was something else, something darker that I couldn't control. I hid it, hoping that as I aged, it would disappear. But now, it seems the time has come to pay the price." Tandi was stunned, but her belief in spiritual forces grew even stronger. Everything her mother was saying seemed part of a larger plan. "Mother," she said quietly, "did you know this would happen? Did you know that one day it would come back?" "Yes," Zola nodded sadly. "But I hoped I could avoid it, that I could live the rest of my years in peace. I was wrong. And now, you will have to face the consequences of my choice." Silence settled over the veranda as Zola's words sank into the minds of her children. Abeo couldn't accept what he had heard. To him, it all sounded too far-fetched. He had always believed in facts, science, and logic, and all of this went against everything he knew. "This is madness," he muttered, standing up. "I can't believe this. We need to find a medical explanation, not rely on old superstitions and fears." But Tandi remained sitting beside her mother, her eyes shining with tears. "Mother," she whispered, "is this fate? Does this mean it was a plan we cannot change?" Zola gave her daughter a sad smile. "I don't know, Tandi. I don't know what will happen now. But I understand that your future is tied to my past. To the choice I made." Abeo couldn't listen anymore. He turned and went into the house, shutting the door behind him, leaving his mother and sister alone. But he knew that this secret had yet to be fully revealed. Chapter 4: Dark Rituals. That night, the silence in the house felt deafening. Abeo lay in his room, staring at the ceiling. Everything he had learned from his mother seemed unbelievable. Dark rituals, magic, fertility lasting decades, none of it made sense to him. He couldn't sleep, replaying her words in his mind. How could anyone believe such a story? Tandi, on the other hand, felt differently. Her spiritual connection to their ancestors and belief in traditions had only strengthened after speaking with her mother. She believed that everything that had happened to Zola was no accident. It was a sign that they needed to acknowledge their heritage, accept it, and find a way to heal. The next day, as Abeo prepared to visit the doctor to once again try to understand the situation from a medical perspective, Camille, Zola's sister, unexpectedly entered the house. Her face was pale, as if she already knew what had happened. Without saying a word, she walked over to her sister and Tandi, who were sitting on the veranda. "Zola," she began, her voice trembling, "have you told them everything? Have you told them the truth?" Zola slowly nodded. "Yes, Camille, they know. I couldn't keep it from them any longer. But now I fear it may be too late." Camille sat down beside her sister, avoiding the children's eyes. Her hands trembled, and it was clear she was troubled by something she had kept hidden for years. "We should have stopped back then," Camille whispered. "I felt it from the start, but you insisted on finishing the ritual. I ran away, but you went through with it." Tandi watched the conversation, feeling as though the pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. "Aunt Camille, what did you do?" she asked cautiously. "What was the ritual?" And why did you leave? Camille slowly raised her head, her eyes filled with fear and regret. It was many years ago, she began, addressing everyone, as if recalling the past. Your mother and I were young and foolish. We wanted something we couldn't have: eternal youth, the ability to become mothers whenever we wished. We went to an old healer in another village. He was known for his powerful rituals, but there were terrifying rumors about him. No one knew where he got his powers, but many feared him. Camille sighed, her voice beginning to shake as she continued. He offered to perform a ritual that would guarantee eternal fertility. We thought it would be harmless, just a way to get what we wanted so desperately. But when the ritual began, I felt something strange, something dark. I got scared and ran away, but Zola decided to continue. She was determined, she couldn't turn back, even when the healer warned that everything had a price. Abeo, who had been avoiding the entire story until now, stepped onto the veranda, hearing his aunt's words. He couldn't hold back his emotions any longer. You're telling me that this so-called magic is the real reason behind what's happening to my mother now? He asked, trying to stay calm, but his voice was filled with disbelief. Yes, Camille replied, lowering her head. The ritual was powerful. It gave your mother what she wanted, but now the consequences have caught up with her. This pregnancy is not natural, and it's not just an illness. It's the result of her decision all those years ago. Abeo couldn't believe his ears. His mother, the woman he had always seen as reasonable and logical, had taken part in a ritual that was now destroying her life. So what now? He asked, gritting his teeth. What can we do to stop this? Camille sighed, her face reflecting pain and helplessness. There's little we can do now. The magic of the ritual is stronger than we thought. We can't turn back time, she whispered. But there is one way. We need to find the healer who performed the ritual. He might be the only one who knows how to stop it. Zola, who had been silent this whole time, finally raised her head. That's impossible, she said quietly. That healer has been dead for many years. Silence settled over the veranda. Zola knew that her past had finally caught up with her, and now there was no escaping the consequences of her choice. Chapter 5: A Family on the Edge. Abeo felt trapped. Everything he believed possible had crumbled before him. Rituals, magic, dark forces, it all seemed so far from his reality. He couldn't stay in the house any longer, unable to accept that his mother was in this situation because of an ancient ritual. He stood up abruptly and walked off the veranda without saying a word. Tandi glanced at her mother and aunt. She understood that they had kept this secret for many years, and although she couldn't blame them, her heart broke with sympathy. She rose to follow her brother, but Zola stopped her. Let him go, she said softly. He needs time to process everything. Tandi remained seated beside her mother, her heart filled with anxiety, but she knew she couldn't leave Zola in such a moment. What are we going to do, Mom? She asked, her voice tender. How can we help you? Zola looked at her daughter with deep regret and sorrow. I don't know, she replied quietly. All these years, I hoped the consequences would never catch up to me. But now that they have, I fear there's nothing we can do. Meanwhile, Abeo was walking along the path that led to the field behind the house, his mind racing with thoughts. How could his mother have been so naive to get involved in such a ritual? Why had she hidden it from them all these years? He had always been the one responsible for their family, the one who made logical decisions. Now, he felt like he had lost control of everything. This is madness, he muttered under his breath, stopping by an old tree. What am I supposed to do now? How can we solve a problem based on ancient magic? Abeo knew that his rational approach to life wouldn't help in this situation, but he was too proud to admit it. He tried to find solutions, turning to science, looking for medical explanations, but now even the doctors couldn't help. After a while, he returned home to find Tandi sitting alone on the veranda. She looked up at him calmly, but the pain in her eyes was clear. Are you okay? She asked, noticing that her brother looked exhausted. I don't know, Tandi, he sighed, sitting down next to her. This whole situation feels insane. We can't rely on stories about magic and rituals. We need to find a solution in the real world. But Mom, she believes in this too much. Tandi gently touched his hand. I understand it's hard to accept. But what if what Mom says is true? What if her past really is connected to what's happening now? Sometimes science can't explain everything, Abeo. He fell silent, pondering her words. His sister had always been more open to such things than he was. But now, faced with this family tragedy, he began to wonder if his skepticism was holding him back. At that moment, Zola appeared in the doorway, her face sunken, and she looked weak. Abeo and Tandi immediately stood up to help her, but she gestured for them to stop. I need to tell you something else, she said quietly. Something that could change everything. Both of them froze, waiting to hear what their mother had been hiding all these years. When I performed the ritual, I didn't just gain eternal fertility, she began. I made a deal that tied not only me but you, my children, to the consequences of this decision. Tandi and Abeo exchanged disbelieving looks. What do you mean? Abeo asked, his voice filled with worry. This isn't just my burden, Zola said, lowering her head. This ritual affected you too. Your lives are connected to the magic I used. And now, I fear that you may suffer as well. Silence hung in the air. Abeo and Tandi didn't know what to say. How could they be tied to a magic they never even knew existed? And what were they supposed to do now? Zola continued, her voice trembling. I don't know how to break this connection. But I do know one thing, if we don't do something, the consequences could be even worse. We need to find a way to stop this before it's too late. Tandi took her mother's hand, her voice filled with determination. We'll figure this out, Mom. We'll get through this together. But Abeo couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too complicated and dangerous. Questions swirled in his mind, ***, what awaits us? How far will this magic go? And can we find a way out before it's too late, ***. The shadows of the past had enveloped their family, and now they stood on the edge, where every decision could lead to unpredictable consequences. Chapter 6, Camille's Secret. A few days passed, but the tension in the house only grew. Everyone felt trapped between the truth of the past and the fear of what lay ahead. Abeo tried to return to his normal life, but thoughts of his mother and her shocking confession haunted him. He didn't know how to cope, how to stay with the people he had always loved and relied on, knowing they had hidden something so serious from him for so long. Tandi, on the other hand, felt closer to her mother and her spiritual heritage. She spent more time with Zola, helping her with daily chores and discussing the past. But one important question still tormented Tandi. ***, why had Aunt Camille never spoken about the ritual? ***. One morning, Tandi decided to have a serious conversation with her aunt. Camille had been visiting Zola's house frequently since the confession, but she avoided talking about the ritual. Tandi found her sitting by the window with a cup of tea, lost in thought. Aunt Camille, Tandi began cautiously, sitting beside her. I need to ask you something that's been bothering me. Why didn't you stop Mom back then? Why did you let her complete the ritual if you knew it was dangerous? Camille sighed, her eyes sinking deep into her memories. She was silent for a long time before she spoke. I knew it was wrong, she finally answered. I felt it from the beginning. But Zola was always stronger than me. She was determined, confident in what she was doing. I was afraid, but I didn't have the courage to stop her. We were both young and foolish. Tandi listened closely, sensing that this was only the beginning. When I left, Camille continued, I tried to forget about it. But the fear stayed with me. And when Zola became pregnant again, years later, I realized that the ritual had taken effect. I tried to warn her, but she refused to listen. For her, it was a wish fulfilled, but for me, it was the beginning of a nightmare. But why didn't you tell us anything when we were growing up? Tandi asked, her voice full of pain. You knew this could affect us someday, didn't you? Camille turned away, her eyes filling with tears. I couldn't, Tandi, she whispered. I was afraid it would tear your family apart. I hoped the ritual would only affect Zola and that you would be spared. But now I realize I was wrong. I should have told you the truth sooner. Tandi felt something strange stir in her heart, a mixture of sympathy and anger. She wanted to understand her aunt, but at the same time, it was hard to forgive her for hiding such an important truth. "Did you really think you could hide this forever?" she asked quietly. "That we'd never find out." Camille looked at Tandi with deep sadness. "I thought time would heal everything," she replied. "But time has only made the problem worse." Tandi thought about how often her family had hidden behind secrets instead of speaking openly. She understood that Camille had been afraid that the truth would destroy their relationships, but keeping it hidden had only made things worse. "Now I see that the ritual didn't just change Mom," Tandi continued. "It changed you, and it changed our entire family." Camille nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "We've all been its prisoners. And now that everything has been revealed, I fear the consequences will be worse than we ever imagined." Tandi thought deeply. Her belief in spiritual forces was strong, but now she realized that their power could bring not only healing but also destruction. She looked at her aunt, then quietly said, "We have to do something. We can't just sit and wait for this to go away. We need to find a way to break this connection before it gets any worse." Camille took a deep breath, as if realizing there was no turning back. "There may be a way," she finally said. "When I ran from the ritual, the healer told me that if there ever came a time when the consequences of the ritual became too great, it could be stopped. But the price would be high." Tandi froze. "What's the price?" Camille looked at her with eyes full of fear and regret. "Someone must sacrifice themselves. Only one who is connected to the ritual can voluntarily break the magical bond. That's the only way to free the family from its consequences." A cold chill ran through Tandi's body. She knew it could be her mother, or it could be one of them. The choice was too heavy, and now they faced a terrible dilemma. "We have to talk to Mom," Tandi finally said, knowing this conversation would lead to the hardest decisions of their lives. The family's fate now hung by a thread, and the choice would have to be made very soon. Chapter 7: The True Cause. Tandi and Camille stepped out of the room, heading toward the veranda where Zola was waiting for them. The air was filled with a silence so thick it seemed as if the whole world had stopped. When they entered the house, Abeo was already there. He sat in the corner of the room, his face dark and tense, as if he sensed that the words spoken today would change everything. Zola lifted her eyes to her daughter and sister, knowing that this was the moment when she would have to make the hardest decision of her life. Tandi sat down beside her mother, taking her hand, while Camille stood nearby, her head bowed. "Mom," Tandi began softly, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "Camille told me how we can stop the ritual. But there's one condition." Zola sighed, already guessing what her daughter was about to say. "I knew this would happen," she said quietly, as if preparing for the inevitable. "I knew that one day the time would come when I'd have to pay the price." Upon hearing these words, Abeo jumped up. "What price? What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice filled with anger and worry. He stepped closer, looking straight at Zola. "We need to find a solution, but not through sacrifices. We can't let this magic control our lives." Tandi exchanged a glance with her mother, then turned to her brother. "The only way to break the connection to the ritual is through a voluntary sacrifice," she said, unable to hide the pain in her words. "Someone who is connected to this magic must sacrifice themselves to free us." Abeo froze, his face contorted in shock. "A sacrifice? You mean someone has to die for all this to end?" His voice shook with rage. "That's impossible. We won't do that." Camille, who had been standing quietly to the side, slowly stepped forward. "It's the only way," she said softly, holding back tears. "We can't avoid the consequences. Our whole family is tied to the magic of the ritual, and the longer we wait, the stronger the consequences will be. Time is not on our side." Zola looked at her children, her face calm, but her eyes filled with deep sadness. She knew the moment had come when she would have to make the choice she had delayed for years. The magic she had used for strength and fertility now demanded its price. "I'm ready," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "I will make the sacrifice to protect you, to free you from the curse I brought upon our family. It's my duty." "No," Abeo shouted, unable to believe what he was hearing. "We'll find another way. We can't just give you up." He struggled to find the words that would change his mother's decision, but deep down, he knew she had already made up her mind. "This was my choice many years ago," Zola replied, her voice full of bitterness and regret. "And now I must correct my mistake. You are my children. I won't let this curse affect you. I've lived a long life, and if my sacrifice can free you, then I'll make it." Tandi looked at her mother through tear-filled eyes, her heart breaking with pain. She couldn't bear to lose Zola, but at the same time, she understood that her mother had already made her choice. "Mom," Tandi whispered, her voice trembling. "We're not ready to let you go." Zola gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "My dear, you'll always carry my love with you," she said, holding Tandi's hand tightly. "But sometimes, to protect those we love, we have to step into the unknown. This is my path, and I will accept it with peace in my heart." Abeo turned and walked toward the door, his eyes filled with rage and pain. "I can't accept this," he said, trying to hold back his tears. "We can't just let you go, Mom." Zola sighed, understanding that her son would need time to come to terms with her decision. "You've always been strong, Abeo," she said, watching him leave. "But sometimes, we must accept that there are things we can't change. I love you both, and I make this decision for you." Camille stood nearby, sensing that the darkness of the past was finally beginning to loosen its grip on them. But the price was too high. She knew Zola had always been ready for this sacrifice, but the realization that the end was near weighed heavily on her heart. "When will it happen?" Tandi asked quietly, her voice barely audible. "Tonight," Zola replied, lowering her eyes. "The ceremony must be completed before dawn." A heavy silence filled the house. They all knew the moment was approaching, one they couldn't avoid. Chapter 8: The Climactic Moment. Night had fallen over the village, and in Zola's house, an intense silence reigned. The light in the room was dim, with only the faint flicker of candles illuminating the faces of those present. The time was approaching, and no one knew how to cope with the looming sense of loss. Zola sat in the center of the room, her face calm, but her eyes carried the weight of what was to come. Abeo stood by the window, staring into the darkness beyond the house. He couldn't believe that his mother, whom he had always seen as strong and unshakable, was ready to sacrifice herself to free their family from this terrible curse. He wanted to scream, to fight, but he felt powerless in the face of forces beyond his control. Tandi, on the other hand, was sitting beside her mother, quietly holding her hand. Her eyes were full of tears, but she tried to remain strong. She understood that her mother had already made her decision, and although it broke her heart, Tandi knew there was no point in arguing now. Camille entered the room quietly, carrying a small pouch filled with old artifacts used in the ritual. She carefully laid them out before Zola, her hands trembling with fear and sorrow, knowing that her role in this ritual was helping her sister make the ultimate sacrifice. "Are you sure, Zola?" Camille whispered, her voice filled with desperation. "We can still try to find another way." Zola shook her head. "No, Camille," she replied firmly. "We've lived with this darkness for too long. It's time to end it. I'm doing this for my children. It's the only way I can atone for my mistake." Camille nodded, understanding that there was no turning back. She slowly began to prepare for the ritual. The room was filled with the faint scent of herbs used in the ceremony, and the quiet whispers of prayers. The candlelight reflected off the ancient objects, creating a mystical atmosphere that sent chills through the room. Abeo watched it all with pain in his heart. He couldn't accept what was happening, but he couldn't leave either. It felt as if his whole life had fallen apart in an instant. He walked over to his mother and knelt before her. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "I can't do this. I can't just watch you go. You've been our anchor, our strength. How will we live without you?" Zola looked at her son, her eyes full of love and tenderness. "You're stronger than you think, Abeo," she said, gently touching his hand. "I've always known that. You've been the one holding our family together when it was needed most. And you will continue to do so. I believe in you." Tandi held back her tears, trying to stay composed, though her heart was breaking. She understood that this was the only way, but the thought of her mother leaving forever was unbearable. "Mom," she whispered, barely able to find the words. "We will always remember you. You've left us with so much wisdom and love. We'll never forget who you are and what you've done for us." Zola smiled at her daughter, feeling warmth in her heart. She knew her children would carry on her legacy, despite the pain they were feeling now. "The time has come," Camille said quietly, looking up at her sister. She handed Zola a vessel filled with water, a symbol of purification, and began to recite ancient words in a language only their family understood. Zola slowly rose to her feet, feeling her strength beginning to wane, but her spirit remained strong. She knew this was her final journey, and she was doing it for her children. She drank from the vessel, feeling warmth spread through her body, and quietly spoke her final words of farewell. "I love you, my children. And I will always be with you, even if I'm not here." With those words, she closed her eyes, and the room fell into a heavy silence. The candlelight dimmed, and the air in the room seemed to grow thicker. Camille continued to chant the ancient words until the moment came when Zola slowly sank to the floor. Tandi rushed to her mother, her heart clenching with fear and pain. She felt a coldness pierce her soul and knew that this was the end. Abeo stood frozen, unable to move. Camille's final words faded, and the room plunged into complete silence. Tandi sobbed, holding her mother close, her heart breaking with grief. Abeo finally stepped forward, kneeling beside his sister. He embraced Tandi, feeling their world fall apart around them. Zola was gone, but her sacrifice had completed the ritual, breaking the bond that had tormented their family for so many years. Chapter 9: Forgiveness and Healing. It had been several hours since Zola left this world, but her spirit still lingered in the house, like a farewell melody lingering on the lips of her children. Time seemed to stand still, the quiet of the night filled the home, and only the whisper of the wind outside reminded them that life continued. Tandi and Abeo sat together in silence. Each was lost in their own thoughts, realizing that the world they had known had changed forever. Tandi could still feel her mother's hands, as if they were still holding her. It was like a gentle touch, a parting gift from Zola, which Tandi felt deep within her soul. "She did it for us," Tandi finally said softly, her voice trembling but full of certainty. "Mom knew that her sacrifice was the only way to save us. And she left in peace." Abeo remained silent, his heart filled with conflict. He had always been the one to make decisions, to protect the family from all harm, but today he felt powerless, unable to stop what had happened. He tried to hold back his tears, but they slowly ran down his cheeks. "I can't accept it," he whispered at last, looking at his sister. "Why did she have to sacrifice herself? Why couldn't I save her?" Tandi gently placed her hand on her brother's shoulder. "We couldn't stop her, Abeo. This was her decision, and she made it knowingly. She knew what she was doing. And as much as it hurts us, we have to respect her choice." Abeo was silent for a long time before sighing deeply and lowering his head. "But what now? How can we live without her?" His voice was filled with pain and despair. "She was our anchor, our strength. What do we do now?" Though she was overwhelmed with grief, Tandi looked at her brother with determination. "We will continue to live," she said firmly. "Mom gave her life for us. We must carry on her legacy. She believed in us, and we have to live up to that belief. We're not alone. Her spirit will always be with us." Abeo didn't know what to say. All he felt was pain and emptiness. He looked at his sister, who, despite her grief, seemed full of inner strength. Her faith in spiritual forces, her understanding of what had happened, gave her a sense of peace. But Abeo couldn't find that peace within himself. Camille, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the room, not interfering in the conversation, finally spoke. "She has freed us from the curse," Camille said quietly, her voice filled with sorrow. "I know it's hard for you right now. But know that her sacrifice was not in vain. You are free now from the shadow of the past that hung over our family for so long." Abeo sighed heavily and stood up. He slowly walked around the room, as if searching for answers to the questions tormenting him. But then he stopped and looked at Camille. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" His voice was low and filled with hidden reproach. "You knew that one day Mom would pay this price." Camille flinched, her face contorted with pain. "Yes, I knew," she admitted, lowering her head. "But I hoped it could be avoided. I hoped that time would change something, that everything would work out." But I was wrong. I kept this secret for too long. Tandi, seeing her brother's anger rising, stepped between them, looking Abeo in the eye. "Brother," she said gently, "she did this for us. We have to remember that our mother loved us more than anything. Her decision was an act of love and sacrifice. We can't let anger destroy what she built." Abeo looked at his sister, his breathing heavy. But then he slowly nodded, realizing that his anger wouldn't change what had happened. He took a deep breath and exhaled, trying to calm himself. "You're right, Tandi," he said quietly, then turned to Camille. "I won't blame you. I understand that you've suffered too. But now, we have to move forward as a family. Mom wanted us to stay together, and we will do that for her." Camille lifted her eyes, her heart filled with gratitude. She knew she could never fully atone for her guilt, but she felt relief that Zola's children had accepted her words. "Thank you," she whispered, wiping away her tears. Abeo and Tandi stood together, silently supporting each other in this difficult moment. The grief they felt was deep, but they knew they had to keep living. The life their mother had cherished so much now rested in their hands. Silence fell once more, but in that silence, the process of healing had begun. Chapter 10: A New Path. Weeks had passed since Zola had left this world, and although the pain of loss still lived in the hearts of Abeo and Tandi, life was slowly returning to normal. The village, which had watched with wonder and concern at what had happened, had come back to life. But Zola's house, once filled with her energy, now seemed empty, despite the presence of her children. Tandi found solace in spiritual practice and caring for the family. Every day, she spent time in the garden that her mother had loved so much. Working with the soil, she felt connected to her mother. Among the flowers and trees, Tandi found peace. She knew that Zola's spirit would always be near, protecting them and guiding them through difficult times. Abeo, though still mourning the loss, had begun to change. It had taken him time to accept his mother's sacrifice, but now he had started to see it not as a tragedy, but as the highest act of love. He realized that Zola had given them a future free from the darkness that had once haunted their family. This realization made him think about his role in the family. Now he felt the need to be strong and protect his sister, just as their mother had done. One day, several weeks after Zola's passing, Abeo and Tandi gathered together on the veranda, watching the evening sunset. The air was warm, the wind whispered through the leaves, and in that moment, they felt that they were not alone. "Do you feel that?" Tandi asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Abeo nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yes," he replied, not taking his eyes off the distant view. "Mom is here. I know it." Tandi smiled, feeling warmth in her heart. The sensation was so familiar and comforting, as if their mother was once again with them, watching over them. "We'll be okay, brother," she said. "Mom wanted us to keep living, to continue her work. We can't let her down." Abeo slowly nodded, realizing his sister was right. "I've realized something," he said. "Mom gave her life to give us freedom. Now, it's our job to live in a way that would make her proud. We need to carry on her legacy." Tandi placed her hand on her brother's shoulder, feeling the bond between them grow stronger after all they had endured. "I think she's already proud of us," she whispered. "And she always will be." At that moment, they both understood that life, despite the pain and loss, would continue. They were now the keepers of their mother's memory, the bearers of her strength and wisdom. The world around them was changing, but the inner strength they had received from Zola remained unshakable. A few more days passed, and Abeo and Tandi decided to take one final step to honor their mother. They gathered everything connected to the ritual, the old artifacts that had been used in their family's dark past, and made their way to the place where it had all begun. Accompanied by Camille, they arrived at the hill where the ill-fated ritual had once been performed. There, under the starry sky, they lit a fire and carefully placed all the objects that had tied them to the magic of the past into the flames. This farewell ritual was important for them. It symbolized the end of the darkness and the beginning of a new path. As the flames consumed the artifacts, Tandi quietly spoke. "Mom, we're letting go of your past. We thank you for everything you've done for us, and we promise to live with honesty, love, and respect. May your legacy always be a light for us." Abeo stood by her side, his heart filled with peace. He felt the weight that had pressed on him for so long begin to lift. He knew that this moment was important not only for him but for their entire family. "We're free," he whispered, watching as the fire consumed the last remnants of the past. They stood together, watching the flames reach toward the sky, taking with them all the shadows that had haunted them for so long. At last, their family was free. Zola was gone, but her love and strength continued to live in the hearts of her children. Zola's sacrifice marked not only the end of the curse but also the beginning of a new path for her children. Abeo and Tandi realized that their mother's legacy was not just her love and care, but also her ability to make difficult decisions for the sake of those she loved. Now, they carried that strength with them, promising each other and themselves to live in a way that would always make their mother proud. The story of their family is one of forgiveness, healing, and eternal love that continues to live on even after death. What would you have done if you were in Abeo and Tandi's place? Could you have accepted your mother's sacrifice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our new captivating stories about love, family, and overcoming challenges. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on all new episodes.